Welcome back to the shop. It's been a rough few weeks, but I finally made it back out into the shop again, so we're going to work on the Mustang again. As you just saw, I recently added an extra neutral to the transmission that wasn't there before. This might look like a stock Fox Body T5 setup, but what the stock shifter handle is attached to is actually a long shifter, and the long shifter is attached to a racing Doug Nash transmission. Now that transmission's got big-ass, beefy, straight-cut, nickel alloy gears in it, so I'm really kind of surprised that this car, being low-powered, lightweight, and small tire, would actually break that transmission, but apparently I can break even the unbreakable. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to pull the transmission out, pull it apart, and see exactly what I broke. What used to be gears and is now just shrapnel. Hopefully it's something where I can get a replacement part, maybe from a Liberty transmission. That might be close, because this transmission is unfortunately about 40 years obsolete, so parts are not easy to find anymore. Anyway, hopefully this isn't going to be another year-long quest for parts with my crazy obsolete things that I like to run. Hopefully I can get it fixed soon, and we can get back to working on other projects in the shop this winter, like the Epic. But anyway, let's get this trans out and let's see what I broke. We interrupt this time lapse so that we can drain the oil out of the transmission. Now ordinarily that would be a pretty boring thing to watch, especially with gear oil, since it takes forever. So it's something you'd want to time lapse away, but when you've broken things, more than oil usually comes out. And with a magnetic drain plug, lots of times you get a pretty good indication of what the problem was just by the stuff that's attached to the drain plug. So in this case, there's nothing, which is unexpected, but okay, we'll take it. Now the color of the fluid has got me a little bit concerned, because I could have sworn I put the Redline shockproof. Oh, you know what? I didn't put the ultralight in there. I put the light, and that's got the yellow color, so that's okay. I was expecting blue, but yeah, in this transmission I ran the slightly thicker oil. All right, back to the time lapse. So it turns out there wasn't any magnet on the drain plugs, so I have to wonder if I've got them backwards. If maybe the fill plug is the one with the magnet on it. That last time I had this thing apart, I wasn't paying attention and I put the wrong plugs in the wrong holes. And maybe I was drinking, who knows. So let's pull out the fill plug. Let's see if it's got a magnet, and it does. And so I did have them in backwards. So there's little bits of metal filings on there, but there's no huge gear teeth stuck to it, which is maybe good, but this is up pretty high in the case, and yeah, if the teeth started sticking to it way high up there, I'd probably got much bigger things to worry about. But so yeah, we've got some fine shavings on here, but anyway, we'll put that back in the proper drain hole, and then we'll put the other one back in the proper fill hole. And we'll proceed to just continue pulling the transmission out and pull it apart and see what kind of horror show is going on inside. So, back to our time lapse. All right, transmission's out. I'm going to pull the shifter off, the mounting bracket, with all the rods and everything attached. We'll just pull it all off in one big unit. And Finnegan, if you're watching, this is how the linkage is supposed to go on these things. And then we'll hoist the thing onto the bench. Now, Doug Nash was a really smart guy, and when he designed this thing, he designed it for racing. He designed it to be really easily serviceable. So it's absolutely my favorite transmission to work on, because pull off the bearing retainer and 4 nuts, everything's on studs. 4 nuts there, 4 nuts pull off the tail housing, and then the whole rest of the thing just splits in half. But even better than that, he designed a nice little cradle that you can use to drop the thing on the bench. So after we get the shifter off, because this side ends up being down on the cradle, we'll take this thing off the transmission jack and we'll drop it on our cradle on the bench, and then tear into it. So probably a good time for time lapse again. All right, here we go, moment of truth. So again, Doug was a smart guy and left us some pry points here to stick a screwdriver in and get the halves separated. At least he gave us that, and there goes my screwdriver. Okay, I can see the problem already. It's kind of what I suspected, which is actually a good thing, because this might be a part that I can find a replacement for. What's missing there? There's supposed to be a gear there that isn't there anymore. And looking down in the bowels of the transmission, it's in two pieces. Two nice clean pieces. Almost makes me wonder if I could just weld them up and reuse them, but no, and it looks like we've bunged up the shaft a little bit here, but I think I can use a file and straighten out those splines. Hopefully. Let's pull this guy out, drop him in there for the time being, and we can see our problem. There's one half of our problem, and there's the other half of our problem. So again, it's a nice clean break, just amazingly clean break. Again, to the point where you'd think you could just weld the thing up and go back and reuse it again. But pretty sure I can get a gear from Liberty that is going to work. So I need to count my splines, make sure they haven't changed the spline on the Liberty LSC transmissions. So we'll get Liberty on the phone tomorrow and see if we can get another one of these gears ordered up, and see if I can't file down the splines on the cluster shaft here, and yeah, and we're off to the races again. Well, it's winter now here, so we'll be off to the races again in the spring. But the bad news turned into good news, because again, this is a part that I think I can easily get versus some of the very specific and very, very obsolete Doug Nash parts. So we'll see what we can get from Liberty, and we'll pick it up from there. So while we got the transmission open, maybe this is a good time for our token educational portion of the video. If you've never seen the insides of a manual transmission and you weren't sure how they worked, it's not witchcraft. It's pretty simple. Power goes in here, power goes out there, and depending on which gears we have active at the time, that's going to determine what the overall ratio is. So between a pair of gears that are meshing, the ratio between the pitch diameters is what determines what the gear ratio is, or the speed ratio is, or the torque ratio is between those two gears. Now, fortunately, it works out that the number of teeth between the two of them ends up being the exact same ratio as the pitch diameters. So if you count the teeth, you can just divide the number of teeth on one gear by the number of teeth on the other gear, and that's going to give you the ratio. So how the power flows through this thing, it looks like this is just one big shaft that goes from in to out, but it's not. This shaft ends in the middle of that gear, and then the output shaft is actually a separate shaft. So if I hold the output shaft, when the thing is in neutral, I can spin the input shaft, and you'll see the output shaft is not turning. So when we put the thing in gear, what we're going to do is we're going to temporarily attach one of these gears to the output shaft. So power flows in here. These gears are always in mesh, so when the input shaft turns, it's always turning this gear, and this gear is connected to all of these other gears on this shaft. So when this gear turns, all of the rest of them turn. So depending on which of these gears we have connected to the output shaft, that's going to determine what our overall gear ratio is going to be. So in first gear, for example, power is going to flow through these gears, and then through the shaft, and then through the missing gear, the one that's supposed to be here, and then back onto this gear. So how we temporarily attach this gear to that shaft is through these sliders. So this slider is on a hub It's got internal splines on the slider. The hub is attached to the shaft. The hub's got external splines, and then the slider will engage. You can see these teeth on the face of all of these gears. So the internal splines on the slider will engage these external teeth on these gears, and then that'll connect that gear to the shaft. So if I grab my pliers here and I jam this thing into first gear, and I can't really see what I'm doing underneath the transmission. There we go, now I got a good grip on it. Okay, so there you can see the hub and you can see the splines on it, and now this gear, there's some slop because this is a Pro Shift. With a street transmission, you wouldn't have that slop. This just makes it shift way, way, way quicker. And then in my G-Force and the more modern racing transmissions, instead of having the Pro Shift lugs, they have teeth on the face of the gear and on the face of the slider, and that's called a face tooth transmission. But anyway, for the old school Pro Shift one like this, so you can see again that this gear is now attached to that shaft. So in first gear, again, power comes in through the input shaft, through this pair of gears, through the missing gear to this gear. So our overall first gear ratio is going to be the number of teeth on this divided by the number of teeth on that. And I have to look up my records just to keep me from going back and counting all of these things, but we've got 23 teeth on here. We've got 33 teeth on there. So if I fire up my calculator here, 33 divided by 23 gives us a ratio of 1.435 if we really want to get precise. So there's a 1.435 reduction here, and then we've got 17 teeth on here. Well, we used to have 17 teeth on there, and we've got 39 teeth on there. So if we take 39 divided by 17, that gives us 2.294 is the ratio here. So our overall first gear ratio is going to be that ratio times that ratio. So the 2.29 times the 1.435, which gives us an overall 3.29 first gear ratio. For second gear, we would slide the slider over this way, and now our power transmission still goes through this pair, but now it's going to go back through that pair. And I don't know what the numbers of these teeth are. I'm not going to go through all of the gears here, but you get the idea. This gear is smaller, this gear is bigger, so this is going to be less of a ratio. So we're still going to have the 1.43 here, but we might be multiplying it by, maybe like another 1.5 here or something to give us our second gear. Third gear is going to be this slider onto this gear. Fourth gear is going to be this slider onto that gear. And then fifth gear, finally, is where, let me actually shift it into fifth gear. Fifth gear, we slide this thing onto the input shaft. So now the input shaft is connected directly to the output shaft, and we have a 1-to-1 ratio in fifth gear here. This transmission doesn't have an overdrive, but with an overdrive, you would still have this input ratio here, but then at the other end here, you would have a very big gear driving a small gear, so that your overall ratio from in to out would be actually less than 1, and that's what's called an overdrive. And now we know how transmissions work. It's a couple days later. I called Liberty yesterday, and they had to check their inventory. So they got back to me today, and they don't have any of the 17-tooth gears with the 10-spline innards. So I'm going to have to wait for them to make some for me. But the good news is they can make some for me. So that's good. The bad news is it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks or so. So this is going to be probably on the bench for the bulk of the winter before I get it back together, but we'll get it back together again. So we're going to wrap this video up here. If I run into more problems trying to put it back together and putting it back into the car, then maybe I'll make another video. But otherwise, the purpose of this video was just get it out, get it apart, and see what was wrong inside it. So we've accomplished that, and then we had some bonus learning along the way as well. So putting it all back together and sticking it back in the car is just a reverse of what you just saw. So that's going to be pretty boring. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Share with your friends, and we'll see you on the next project. underneath the stock shifter handle is a long transmission. Take 3. And hopefully that's a better take. And that's me banging the door into the toolbox. And that's a take.